European history. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, 1949–1970. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, 1949–1970. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO was a defensive and military alliance of the Western Bloc countries formed on 4 April 1949 in Washington, D.C. The founding members were 12 nations, which included USA, the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Italy, Canada, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Norway, Iceland, Portugal and Denmark. Greece and Turkey joined in 1952 and West Germany in 1955 as the 15th member. It was mainly a defensive alliance against the spread of Russian communism, which was a threat to the capitalist powers led by USA. NATO was therefore formed as a result of the Cold War. NATO originated from the Treaty of Brussels signed on 17 March 1948 by the Western European countries, which included Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France and Britain. This treaty was intended to protect Western Europe against the communist threat and to bring about greater collective security. NATO had a permanent headquarters in Paris, France, and a joint military command known as the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, shape initially commanded by U.S. Army General Dwight David Eisenhower. Reasons the formation of the North Atlantic Organization NATO in 1949. According to its charter, NATO was formed to achieve the following aims. The burning desire by the Western powers to prevent the spread of Soviet or Russian communism after World War II led to the formation of NATO in 1949. The desire to maintain peace and stability in the region of alliance, the North Atlantic area, led to the formation of NATO. It was for this reason that the member states of NATO later established a joint military command shape in 1950. The need to protect the member states against authoritarian or dictatorial rule led to the formation of NATO. Therefore, NATO was to promote freedom and democracy among the member states. The desire to defend the independence and territorial integrity of the member states, which was being threatened by Russian aggression, also led to the formation of NATO in 1949. Therefore, NATO was formed as a bulwark or protection against Soviet or Russian aggression, especially in Western Europe. The need for unity and cooperation among the member states led to the formation of NATO. It was formed to promote transatlantic cooperation between USA, Canada and the Western European countries like Britain, France, Belgium and Italy, among others. Besides the above aims in the Charter, the formation of NATO in 1949 was prompted by the prevailing circumstances, which included the following. The rise of Harry Truman in USA led to the formation of NATO in 1949. Harry Truman took over presidency in the USA following the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the wartime president, on 12 April 1945. Harry Truman formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO in 1949 so as to keep world peace and also protect Western Europe from communist Russia. The effect of the March 1946 Iron Curtain speech of Winston Churchill led to the formation of NATO. This speech warned the Western capitalist powers against the spread of Russian communism, and therefore it called for a stronger alliance amongst the Western powers which would stand. European history. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, 1949–1970. Against communist Russia. This therefore influenced the Western powers to form NATO in 1949. The Truman Doctrine of March 1947 led to the formation of NATO. By this policy, USA gave financial assistance to the Greek and Turkish governments to suppress communist movements in their countries so as to prevent them from falling under Russian influence. America also promised assistance to any country in Europe that was threatened by Russian aggression. This promoted friendship between USA and the Western European powers, which facilitated the formation of NATO in 1949. The Marshall Aid Plan of June 1947 also led to the formation of NATO. By this plan, the Americans gave economic aid to both the defeated and victorious nations of Europe for the post-World War II recovery programs. This also promoted friendship and cooperation between USA and those countries in Europe that received the aid. This cooperation eventually led to the formation of NATO in 1949. The Berlin Blockade Incident of 1948 to 1949 by Russia led to the formation of NATO. The threat of the Soviet or Russian blockade of West Berlin City in 1948 to 1949 and the inconvenience it created to the Western powers through the Berlin airlift made them to form NATO so as to counteract such threats in future. This was because the Western powers interpreted this as a clear evidence that Russia would aggress extensively in future. The ideological differences between Russia and the Western democratic powers, i.e. communism versus capitalism, also led to the formation of NATO. This was because it created fear, mistrust and suspicion between Russia and the Western powers. The Russian imperialism or expansion in Eastern Europe threatened the Western capitalist powers. Russia had taken over a number of countries in Eastern Europe like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria and East Germany, which dominated both politically and economically. This threatened the Western powers, which therefore decided to form a defensive alliance against Russian imperialism in 1949. The imperial interests of the superpowers led to the formation of NATO. There was a struggle between USA and Russia to control the world's resources like minerals and strategic areas. As a result, USA influenced the Western European powers to join her and form NATO so as to protect the American political, economic and strategic interests in the North Atlantic area. The spying network system also led to the formation of NATO. A number of secret agencies were formed in the post-World War II period by the Western powers to spy on Russia. For example, there was the Central Intelligence Agency CIA of USA, the Federal Bureau of Investigations FBI of Britain, and the Mossad of Israel. These agencies exaggerated the Russian threat towards the Western capitalist powers, which influenced them to form a defensive alliance against Russia in 1949. The arms race led to the formation of NATO in 1949. After World War II, there was a nuclear arms race between USA and Russia as both superpowers competed in the manufacture of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. There was therefore a fear among the Western European powers that Russia would use her weapons to attack them. As a result, they decided to form NATO in 1949 so as to defend themselves against any possible Russian aggression. European history: the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, 1949-1970. This treaty was intended to protect Western Europe against the communist threat and to bring about greater collective security. This eventually led to the formation of NATO. Achievements of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO. It led to the union or integration of the forces of the member states into a joint command force or army in 1950, which they named the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe shape. Its first military base was in Paris, the capital of France, and it was initially commanded by U.S. Army General Dwight David Eisenhower. It was this force that was used to maintain peace and among the member states. NATO maintained its presence in Europe as a security body up to 1970, which was itself an incredible achievement. Therefore, despite the challenges that the organization faced, it managed to survive. Up to 1970. It created balance of power in Europe. The formation of NATO created tension and fear in Eastern Europe, thus leading to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955 by the communist countries led by the Soviet Union, Russia, as a reaction to NATO. Therefore, despite the Cold War, balance of power was relatively achieved between the Western and Eastern countries. This also helped to create stability in the region. It strengthened unity and economic cooperation among the member states, which was vital in maintaining peace in the world. Various economic organizations were established in Western Europe along the NATO principles. Among these bodies included the European Coal and Steel Community X, formed in 1952, as well as the European Economic Community EC, which was formed in 1957 by the Western European nations. These regional organizations helped to bring Western Europe closer to a common market, which was a major achievement. It modernized and increased the naval and military structures of the member states. It called upon the member states to contribute forces and military equipment to the NATO members, which they did, for example, the USA to Britain. This also helped to maintain peace and security in the region, as it strengthened the military capacity of such powers like Britain. NATO extended financial assistance to the member states like Belgium, Norway and Denmark. This money came mostly from USA, and it made them financially stable. This therefore contributed to the economic recovery of such countries after World War II. For example, there was the Marshall Aid from USA to a number of European countries. It defended the independence and territorial integrity of the member states against external aggression, especially from the Soviet Union, Russia. The small member countries like Greece, Turkey, Belgium and Holland, among others, had their independence protected from the Russian aggression by the NATO Joint Command or Army. NATO contained to check the extension of Russian communism into Western Europe between 1949 and 1970. This was through the creation of closer political union among the member states of the Western capitalist powers. This strengthened them against the expansion of communism up to 1970. It protected the member states by ratifying or signing treaties aimed at limiting the production and testing of deadly arms or nuclear weapons after World War II. For example, the NATO member European history: the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, 1949-1970. Kingdom Great Britain banned all tests of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, in outer space and underwater. As a result of NATO's efforts, the occupation of West Germany by the Allied powers since World War II was ended, and she was recognized as an equal power. After World War II, the Allied powers occupied, with the Western powers occupying West Germany while the Soviet Union occupied the East Germany. When NATO was formed in 1949 by the capitalist powers, West Germany was consequently admitted into this organization NATO in 1955. This increased the membership of the organization, which helped to strengthen her. NATO succeeded in keeping wars away from the European continent between 1949 and 1970, despite the threats from the Cold War. Its Joint Military Command or Army worked hard to prevent the outbreak of another destructive war in Europe, thus creating peace and stability in the region up to 1970. Failures of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO. NATO failed to stop the existence of communist activities in Western Europe between 1949 and 1970. As a capitalist organization, NATO was formed with the primary objective of checking the spread of communism from Russia to Western Europe, but this was not fully achieved. For example, there existed communist political parties especially in France, Italy and West Germany, and this posed a threat to the survival of NATO and peace in the region. NATO failed to punish some of the member states that abused its charter or constitution. For example, some NATO member states got involved in the affairs of the states outside its area. Operation like in Africa, especially during the struggles against the apartheid regime in South Africa and in the Middle East conflict between Israel and her Arab neighbors, where USA and Britain chose to take sides. This therefore caused conflicts among the member states because it was against the principles of NATO as an organization. NATO failed to ensure absolute or total unity and cooperation among the member states. There were always conflicts among the member states over some issues like the hatred of American dominance of NATO. It was because of this that France withdrew all her forces from the NATO military command in 1966, and all NATO troops in shape were asked to leave Paris, France, which had served as their headquarters. She therefore adopted a neutral position between the Soviet Union, Russia and America. There were also disagreements between Greece and Turkey, which forced Greece to withdraw from the organization. It also failed to stop the emergence of small groups or alliances among its member states. For example, there was the Anglo-American Alliance of 1962. By this alliance, Britain was supposed to be supplied with advanced nuclear weapons and submarines by USA. This caused suspicion among the member states. France and West Germany also reached an agreement to assist one another in times of problems. These small alliances undermined the performance of NATO, thus threatening world peace and order. NATO members in Europe failed to live up to their promises of their defense spending by 3% of their national budgets. This eventually led to the manufacture of dangerous weapons like nuclear weapons, which threatened world peace and order up to 1970. European history. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO, 1949-1970. The creation of NATO increased international tension between the Soviet Union, Russia and USA. This led to the Cold War, which threatened world peace between 1949 and 1970. For example, it led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955 by the communist countries led by the Soviet Union, Russia, to oppose NATO. There was always a possibility of war as the NATO powers were determined to stop the Soviet expansion at all costs to places in the North Atlantic areas. Reference questions. To what extent was NATO successful in maintaining peace in Europe between 1949 and 1970? How successful was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO successful in achieving the objectives of its founders up to 1970?